Think of a system. The solar system with the sun, planets, and comets. A computer hard drive. Its motors, its platters, and its pivots. Anything and everything that works together. A system exists when individual components work together. Now imagine that one of the components of the system breaks down. That whole system is compromised. Unless that one component is restored to its original, the whole system is effectively destroyed. In the Pennsylvania State House, a group of men debated whether or not to sign a document, or more specifically, the United States Constitution. These men poured their all into creating the perfect system that would enable the quote to be realized. The debate lasted for months, and the result concluded 38 signed out of the 55 delegates. The Constitution is put in place. Upon looking on the same document 237 years later, I noticed that half of the first 10 amendments were designed to hamper the government's ability to exercise its power. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 specifically. The amendments were not just randomly passed. They were debated for months. The delegates were skilled political engineers who argued everything that could go wrong once the Constitution was ratified or not. Those who are against argued that ratifying the Constitution would enable a centralized government, and the system will deviate from its original course and start to break down. When the government becomes too powerful, power in terms of control over its people, the President, Congress, and the judiciary would collude together to slowly become an autocracy. To keep this from happening, the delegates fought each other for a compromise. The Constitution, still used today, was the result. Everything on the Constitution outlines who gets power, what they can and cannot do with that power. But what happens when the components, all of it, doesn't just fail, but fail deliberately and with coordination? That system has broken down. A man stays at a hotel in Hong Kong. He is anxiously waiting for journalists who doesn't even know him, and in turn, he doesn't even trust, to show up. Edward Snowden watched the hours go by. He watched days go by. He was pleading, please show up before the NSA realize, because what he's about to do will change everything. The two journalists, Laura and Glenn, finally showed up, and as soon as they were together, they started to lay the groundwork to reveal a massive breach of conduct by their government. Snowden begins by deciphering technical terms such as metadata, communications bearer. Acronyms such as CSS, DNI needed to be understood before they were finished. On June 5th, The Guardian broke Glenn's first story. It detailed the FISA court order to Verizon to give up its information of users. The next day, it ran the story of the PRISM program, the collection of information of content from users. Everything was blown up. News stories after news stories of the leaks began popping up on websites and televisions, and it was clear what will happen next. The US government would use its machinery to track down the person who revealed their hidden surveillance program, and they would use that person's face as a scapegoat. Alone, hopeless, and with the possibility of a life imprisonment, he hid under the shadows. But why would Edward do this? He has a wife, a house on a lease, a 200 grand per year salary. For most, this was the perfect life, and he threw it all down the drain. It was his great belief, greater than anything else, that surveillance is a violation of a person's life, not just to Americans, but all of mankind. He details in his memoir that he uncovered mass surveillance in the hopes that the system would revert to a more democratic path, and that the route to a surveillance state be prevented. But as we will see, each of the components of the system tragically failed in their own way. The public failed to protest and forced their government to change course. The legislative branch, the two houses of Congress, left out its role as a supervisor to the intelligence community's activities. As the employees of private intelligence contractors kept expanding, the representatives and the senators informed of the intelligence community's activities kept dwindling. And those that were informed didn't know the extent. The judicial branch was even more tragic because it colluded with the intelligence community, or forced to collude with. The FISC, supposedly a court to approve or oppose any surveillance conducted to an individual, has an opposed rate of a meager 1%, more like a rubber stamp than a court. And when a civil rights group, ACLU, challenged the federal government on the NSA surveillance, an intriguing event. What transpired was that the government didn't defend itself. Instead, it ruled out that the entities like the ACLU had no right to sue the Director of National Intelligence, since it cannot prove that the NSA conducted any surveillance at all. And since the topic of surveillance is a state secret, the leaks to journalists did not count. That means that the ACLU or anyone's only hope was to have access to the NSA's files. The final conclusion? The US Supreme Court dismissed ACLU and the Amnesty International lawsuit and accepted the government's argument. Society only works if and only the components work as intended. The subsequent failures of all major components cause the Constitution to halt and catch fire.